feel like your guitar playing should be way better by now? What if there was a way you could make more progress this week than you've made for the last couple of months without adding any practice time? Would you try it? Well, today I'm going to show you 5 ways to get consistent results on guitar in a fraction of the time so that your playing finally matches the years that you've put in, and how to adopt a mindset of legends like Steve Vai, which can level up your skills so fast it almost feels ridiculous. If 2 guitar players spend exactly the same amount of time practicing, how can it be possible for one to make faster progress than the other? Now, to understand that, we first need to understand how improving on guitar actually works. Let's take a very simple example of a 3-note per string scale like this. When I first come to learn a scale like this, I might start with just these 3 notes, and through correct repetition, this will become easier and easier, and it'll eventually become automatic, and at that point I can start to add the next string. And then I have this. And again, eventually that becomes automatic, then I can get to the next 3 notes. And then I can keep adding strings until I eventually have the whole scale. But the thing to notice is that each time I add a string, I'm essentially increasing the difficulty ever so slightly, because there's more to visualize and more to remember. And this same principle applies to everything, not just learning a scale, but licks, rhythm guitar, you name it. But the first problem comes when we try to make the jump too fast. So for example, I start with my first string, and now I suddenly just jump and try to learn the entire scale. And what happens? Inevitably, I will make a mistake. And that's because I've made it too difficult. If I make a scale or anything else too difficult, I'll constantly make mistakes, and then I'm not making any progress because I'm not reinforcing anything. So as a rule of thumb, I always want at least 4 perfect repetitions in a row before I increase the difficulty on anything. You see, ironically, trying to rush ahead makes our progress even slower. So for faster progress, we actually need to be more patient, but not too patient. Because if I spend a whole week just practicing these 3 notes, I'm just going over something I can already do, and that's not optimal either. What this means is, whatever it is we are learning, be it a scale or a riff or a lick or a technique, the first way to make the most amount of progress in the least amount of practice time is to spend our time in that difficulty sweet spot where it's not too hard, but also not too easy. We don't want to allow impatience to push us too far into the difficulty, and we don't want to allow subtle laziness to stop us from pushing our limits either. Well, once you've learned a lick or a scale, it doesn't take long until you start playing up and down the scale and you're thinking about, like, what did that guy say on YouTube today? And like, maybe I need to go and get some coffee from the shop. And right there, that is the mistake. This is the next thing we need to avoid for faster progress. So you might not be literally talking to yourself out loud while practicing, but inevitably your mind will start to wander as your fingers are still moving. And this is something that we want to limit as much as we can, because if you want to make more progress with your playing, we need to focus. But what's a practical way that we can do that? Well, let's say that I already knew this pattern that I showed in a previous video. Now, one reframe is that I might want to pay attention to the dynamics. So I give the dynamics a number, like I'm playing it at a 4, and I might play it as loud as I can at dig in. That's more difficult. Okay, as I'm digging in. Now I might play it, do the opposite, and play it as quietly as I can. And that would be like a 1, but at the same speed. And then dig in, and then go quiet. This takes a lot more control and a lot more concentration. Exercises like this will over-engineer your control over a lick or a pattern. But also, just as importantly, it's going to force you to focus a lot more closely. So I could also do a similar exercise where I'm blending in and out the palm muting like this. So even when you're reviewing something that's easy to you, you should always look for ways to stay focused and over-engineer your technique. There's always a way to get better. Which brings me to the third way to make faster progress with the same amount of practice time. And to show you that, I need to talk about these guys. Now, you would think that if you could play like Steve Vai, you might be tempted to not bother trying to get any better on guitar. But the reality is that even Steve Vai is very humble about his own playing. And I even saw Guthrie Govan as well as Joe Bonamassa in interviews just recently honestly speaking very critically of their own playing. And the thing is that it actually makes a lot of sense that these guys are never satisfied with their playing and they've spent their whole lives working to get better, which is why they've become the best in the world. What we need is a white belt mentality. So what does that mean? Never stop trying to learn more from better players, or even any players for that matter, because even a total beginner can teach you something. What's a practical way that we can apply the white belt mentality to guitar playing? Well, take something that you think you can already play, like a simple, easy solo, a solo that is easy for you, or even just a scale, and record yourself and listen back and ask yourself honestly, is this perfect? How can I learn to make this better, other than just playing it the same way over and over forever? So if you don't know, try sending that video to a good teacher and ask them. Maybe your weakness is the tone, maybe your weakness is the timing, but don't assume that you already know the best way to get better at those things, because the answer is not always just practice more. So the bottom line with the white belt mentality is there's probably an easier and faster way to get where you want to be on guitar, so never stop learning as well as practicing. But what do you actually do when you sit down to practice? Do you have a practice routine? Is it in your head, or is it written down on paper or in a spreadsheet? Now, you probably don't need me to tell you that having a practice routine is very important to getting more progress out of a limited practice time. So this is going to be number 4. But why is it important? Well, imagine a chef that never followed a recipe and just added random ingredients to every dish they cooked. Would they become a professional chef? Probably not. And it's the same for guitar. Everyone has a limited amount of time to practice. So if you don't follow a plan, which you can customize and tweak and update over time, of course, you'll likely end up as guitarist B on this graph. Also, it's hard to be focused in your practice session if every 2 minutes you have to choose what you should be focusing on. Whereas if you have a practice routine, you just follow it. But how do we create a practice routine and tailor it to our exact style, level, and preference? Well, that is literally the topic of the Shred Routine Roadmap, which, full disclosure, this is my paid course, so it's not free, and I am selling to you right now. But if you're interested in that, you can check it out, first link in the description. But for now, very briefly, this is how I recommend you set out a practice routine. Split your time into 4 parts. The first part is warm-up and memorization, then technique, then repertoire, and then finally improvisation. So for example, if you had 1 hour to practice, you might spend 10 minutes memorizing a new lick or a scale just to warm up. Then you might spend 20 minutes on your alternate picking technique. Then you might spend 20 minutes practicing a new solo or a song. And then finally 10 minutes on improvisation with a backing track at the end. Now again, practice routines are a massive topic, which is why I've dedicated an entire course to them. But this should be enough to get you started. So surely if we're doing focused practice, pushing just a little outside our comfort zone, and we have a consistent practice routine, there's nothing else we can do to make faster progress as guitarists and musicians, right? Well, actually there is, because there will always be some dead time in your day when you're not actually able to practice guitar, but you are able to either watch or listen to educational guitar content. So for example, you could watch educational guitar content on a break at work, or on a train during a commute, or possibly even listen to it while driving, as long as that's safe for you. Even if this is passive learning and not as good as hands-on practice, you'll still be able to make a little bit more progress, and not only that, you'll get inspired and keep guitar playing on your mind. And crucially, you'll be less likely to waste precious hands-on practice time listening to or watching something, because you already did that when you were stuck away from the guitar. And now for your convenience, and obviously for my own benefit too, here's a link to a playlist which shows more ways to make faster progress on guitar with specific guitar techniques in my own videos. But that way, you're more likely to end up as guitarist A and keep learning and make more guitar progress in less time.